So in this short video, I'm just going to introduce you to what you're going to be carrying out in week 6 and 7 of geg210 Practical Human Geography, which is looking at survey analysis techniques. As explained in the handbook, part of the assignment that you have to carry out in the first part of this course involves analysis of survey data that we are going to be providing you with. So in this short video, I'm just going to be explaining a little bit about how I'm organising these sessions. So just to outline what you're going to be learning in these 2 weeks, you're going to be learning about the main fundamentals of survey analysis, the basics of survey analysis using a package called SPSS. I'm also going to be showing you how you manipulate data and how you recode data in SPSS, and introducing you to the fundamentals techniques of survey analysis, showing you how you cross-tabulate variables and how you can carry out chi-squared analysis. You have encountered chi-squared previously. You would have encountered this in the skills course last year. And I'm also going to be looking at how you present data analysis, and that's really what we're going to be looking at in week 7. So in week 6, we're going to be focusing on getting to grips with SPSS and using it to carry out some simple data analysis. So what is survey analysis, and why am I using this term rather than just talking about statistics? The survey analysis occurs to the processes of drawing broader conclusions from research data. Survey analysis refers exclusively to the analysis of quantitative survey data. So we use survey analysis when we're trying to interpret questionnaires that have been carried out with closed questions. So we cannot use survey analysis techniques for qualitative data. So for example, if you've designed a questionnaire that includes written-in responses, we can't analyse that data using survey analysis. So it applies to the analysis of data that can be coded into numerical data. As I've already suggested, that the survey analysis is only dealing with the analysis of quantitative data. So we're only looking at questions that can be converted into data, into numerical data. Now, there are 2 main types of variables in surveys or questionnaires. And these are either continuous or categorical, and it's important that you understand the difference between these. So continuous variables are those that can be measured along a continuum and have a numerical value. For example, age, we could think of exact age, that is, as a continuous variable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Sometimes you will see continuous variables referred to as interval variables. And I should also say that in SPSS refers to continual variables as scale variables. Categorical variables have discrete values. So if we think about age, for example, often when we complete a questionnaire, the question isn't always asked how old we are or what our exact age is, but we're often asked to choose a tick box of what age group we are in, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, etc. And that's an example of a categorical variable. It's important to understand that while I'm talking about these as 2 distinctive types of variables, the distinction is not always clear-cut. And as an example that I've just illustrated, characteristics such as age can be treated in either way. It's also important to be aware that there are different types of categorical data. So the most common form of categorical data is what we call nominal variables. So these are variables that have 2 or more categories. But what's important here is that there is no intrinsic order. So the numerical values that we give to each category has no meaning in itself. So if we code something 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're not saying that either 1 is lower or 5 is higher. So there's no intrinsic ordering to the numerical values. Most data that we collect in survey analysis are nominal data. So if we collect data on housing, ethnicity, occupation, those are nominal variables. Dichotomous or binary variables or nominal variables will have only 2 categories or levels. So these are simple yes, no variables, such as are you in full-time education, yes or no. And one of the things, as you will be aware of when we actually go to look at the analysis, one of the key things we do in survey analysis is actually to reduce nominal variables, recode these into dichotomous. Because when we're doing statistical analysis, it's often much easier if we're dealing with binary variables rather than variables that have 3 or more categories. You can also come across ordinal variables, and these are variables that have 2 or more categories in the same way as nominal variables, only these categories can be ordered or ranked. So for example, we could treat responses to a Likert style question. That's a question when you ask people to how likely they are to agree with the following statements. And if we code those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we could imply that that is an ordinal variable, that there is a meaning to the numerical coding. In practice, though, I recommend that you treat variables as nominal or binary, and don't worry too much about whether they're ordinal or not. I'm only just alerting you to this because you will find references to ordinal variables in some of the literature and other resources that you might find on the internet. So when it comes to the type of analysis that we do in survey analysis, we are actually quite restricted to what we can do because of the kinds of data that we have. So a lot of the statistical techniques that you have been taught previously are not necessarily going to be relevant here. And I'm only going to be teaching you really one technique for this particular exercise. So an important first stage when we are doing survey analysis, so when we've carried out, when we've collected our data, is to do what we call descriptive analysis. And that's simply looking at how people have responded to each question. So looking at the percentage distribution of respondents in each category. Now you will have learned an awful lot about measures of central tendency, such as mean, medium and mode, but those measures of central tendencies are not really of any relevance for most data collected through a questionnaire, as these tend to be categorical. You can sometimes maybe identify a modal group, that's the most popular response to a particular question, but we're not really using those measures of central tendency. All we're really looking at is the percentage distribution. And as our data are categorical in the social sciences, we have very, very few continuous variables. We really are restricted in the kinds of statistical tests that we can carry out. Now you might or you might not remember from your first year statistics, there are 2 different types of statistical analysis. There are those that and these are parametric or non-parametric tests. You don't have to worry too much about the terminology. Parametric tests assume that the underlying distribution of a particular variable follows a normal distribution. The point you have to understand is that if you have categorical data, that assumption of normality doesn't make any sense. So you can't use non-parametric tests. So a lot of the tests that you've learned, say for example the student t-tests, correlation coefficients, are not suitable. They can't be used for categorical data. What you can do with categorical data is you can look at the associations between two variables, and we can test whether an association between two variables is significant. And the most common test that you will use here is a chi-squared test. Now, I'm not going to be going back and telling you how you calculate chi-squared tests, because when we use SPSS, you don't really need to understand the full statistics behind it. You really need to learn how to interpret it. So I'm going to be showing you how SPSS calculates the chi-squared for you, and more importantly, how you interpret it, because that's the really important thing that you need to learn. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the data set that you're going to be carrying out in order to complete the survey the survey analysis part of your assignment. You're going to be using a survey called the Student Experience Survey, and it's from 2002. Now, I collected this data 20 years ago, and I collected it for an Economic and Social Research Council funded project on the choices and experiences of higher education students living in the parental home. So I received a bit of funding to carry out a project that involved both qualitative and quantitative analysis of students living in the parental home. I carried this particular project out because at that time we were identifying an increased trend towards more students staying at home, and particularly at the time there was the decision to stay at home was often treated as a less favourable option, that students were assumed to be missing out. So I was particularly interested in understanding this change in student mobility patterns. Why were students choosing to stay at home, and what were their experiences of university? And you can find more out about this project. I have a number of publications that I've published from it, but the main one is an article that I published in 2006. So as you can see, quite a few years after the survey was first carried out. Carrying out and writing up social science research can take quite some time. And this is an article called "Don't You Think You're Missing Out Living at Home? Student Experiences and Residential Transitions," and it was published in the Sociological Review. So you can go and read how I've actually analysed the survey in that particular journal article. You will see that I've used a technique that I'm not going to have time to teach you about in the sessions that I have available in this module. I use a technique called logistic regression, and what I can do with this logistic regression technique, which is a modelling technique, is I can look at multiple relationships between the different variables. However, the first stage that I carried out when I was analysing this survey 20 years ago was to look at the frequency distributions and to carry out the fundamental cross tabulations between the variables in the questionnaire. So I'm going to be showing you how these core techniques. And I would say that if any of you are interested, if you find the cross tabulations and chi-squared very easy, straightforward, and you would like to learn more, then ask me, and then in one of the sessions I can quickly show you the ins and outs of logistic regression. But as I know many students do struggle with quantitative analysis, what I'm going to teach for this session is really going to be just focusing on the basics. So this survey was carried out online, and it was one of the first ever online surveys that were carried out with students. So 20 years ago, I thought this was going to be the future. I thought online surveys were going to revolutionise how we collected data. The problem is I couldn't predict how ubiquitous they were going to become. 20 years ago, we didn't have Microsoft Forms, we didn't have SurveyMonkeys. We actually had to write computer programming in order to be able to actually design an online survey. So there weren't very many online surveys, and we got a relatively healthy response. We carried it out among 4 universities in and around the Liverpool area. I was working at Liverpool University at the time. And we had over a 10% response rate, which is very high, really, especially for an online survey nowadays. So there are 3,690 cases in this survey, so it's quite a large survey. If you actually read my paper, you will see that I've actually reduced it to 3,282 because that's the number of full-time students. But the data set that I've given you, I haven't restricted it to the full-time students. So you've got the 3,690 cases in total. So what I've done is I've saved a subset of this survey, so you haven't got all of the questions that we asked. And I've saved a subset, and you will find that in the file called Student Survey October 22. And the .sav, that indicates that this is a data file for SPSS. So files ending .sav are SPSS data files. So when you open that in SPSS, it will open it as a data file. And on the KLE, I've put some documentation. I've put the original survey, a copy of the original survey. See, it looks very different from contemporary online surveys. I've also put a breakdown of all of the different variables that are included in the data set that I've given you, so you can have a look at all of the different variables that are available. So what are you going to do for your analysis section? So you're going to be using this survey to explore the characteristics and experiences of students living in the parental home. And I want you to do two things. I want you to investigate whether there are any differences by gender, ethnicity, social class and disability between students who live with parents and those who do not. I also want you to consider whether there are differences in student experiences of university life between those who live at home with parents and those who do not. So there's two questions. Are there socioeconomic and cultural differences between students who live with parents and those who do not? And what are their experiences of student life? And as I've already mentioned, you're going to be using a statistical package called IBM SPSS Statistics, or SPSS for short. And if you want to know what SPSS stands for, it stands for Statistical Package for the Social Sciences. This package was first released over 50 years ago, so it's one of the oldest statistical packages out there. It's also the most widely used statistical package in social science research. So I've been carrying out social science research for 30 years, and I've been using SPSS for all of that time. I know you've been taught Minitab in other courses, but I've chosen to go to SPSS because you are more likely to encounter SPSS when you leave university than you are Minitab, and I just find it's really intuitive. It's the state of the art when it comes to analysis of social science data. So I think it's an important employability skill for you to say to a potential employer that you are familiar with SPSS. However, one of the drawbacks of SPSS, as it's now owned by IBM, they brought it some years ago. SPSS is not free. You have to purchase a license in order to be able to use the software. And in recent years, open access software, particularly you might have heard of the software package R, are becoming more popular because you don't have to buy them. Now, I know in other courses, in GGE, other students are learning about R. I know that some of the geologists are learning how to use this package. I'm not using R because R does not have the easy to use interface that SPSS has. Yes, SPSS costs money, but it's simple to use. It is a very complex data set. Sorry, it is a very complex software, but the way you access it, it has a very easy to use interface. So it's easy to find your way around SPSS. And the good thing about it is that you can carry out really detailed statistical analysis. I'm not saying you don't have to understand the statistics behind it, but you don't actually have to be able to do any of the calculation. And you don't have to write your own programming. So that's the real advantage. I'm not going to be having to teach you programming in SPSS. You can actually write your own programs within SPSS. It does have that facility, but that's only something that you start to do when you become really familiar with it. So that's why I'm using SPSS. It's the industry standard. It is the package to use for, particularly for social science research. It's an important employability skill that you're going to have through learning how to use SPSS. So a little bit about how you get started. You open the IBM SPSS statistics from the choice of programs. I have checked that this software is available in the computer labs in the William Smith building. So you open IBM SPSS and this dialog box will open up. Now, my dialog box is going to look a little bit different from when you open it for the first time, because I use this statistical package quite a lot. So it's given me a list of the different data sets that I've been using recently. Obviously, you're not going to have those, so you're going to have to go and open the data set Student Survey October 22. Very, very simple, therefore, to get started. You open the package, and the first thing that you do is open your data set. Now, I'm not going to go through in this video about how you do the analysis. What I've done instead is I've done some screen capture videos that talk you through the different stages of SPSS. So if you go onto the KLE, there is a folder with the SPSS videos, and I've done 7 in total. They are in order, so introduction, then menus in SPSS, frequencies, crosstabs and chi-squared, recoding variables, and then another video on recoding Likert style questions. But then at the end, I remembered I hadn't actually told you how to save data and outputs, and that's why you've got a very short video at the end, which is video 7. And you will find these and the instructions for your assignment are all on the KLE.